Hi everyone, welcome to the Linguist Library. It's Emily. Today we're going to talk about Italy, one of my favorite topics in the whole wide world. And I am so elated to announce that this is actually a tag, an original tag, and it's a collaboration between Daniela from The Uncommon Reader and me, yours truly, Emily from the Linguist Library, and Daniela from The Uncommon Reader, who is Italian and lives in Italy. And this tag is essentially just an homage to that beautiful country and all that it's given the world. So Daniela and I were inspired by cities that we love around Italy, and also by some literary works that are either set in Italy or have some sort of Italian vibe to them. So prop number one is based on a fabulous saying that I love, and it's also about Rome, one of my favorite cities in the world. As some of you know, I lived in Rome. I'll try to find some pictures of me in Rome, but I did not know that I was going to become a booktuber back then. And even just in general in my life, I just haven't taken enough pictures. That's how I feel. I don't know how you feel, but I digress. So, historical fiction and nonfiction. So these books don't necessarily have to be set in the cities that they are giving a nod to, but if they are, that's great. I have two books that I want to talk about for this prompt. The first book I want to mention is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. Most people who have had some sort of contact with Italian literature have read Umberto Eco because he is a towering figure. He is such a big name when it comes to Italian literature, and that's for good reason. So this is a historical fiction set in a monastery, and it is beautifully filled with literary references and nods because Umberto Eco was a bit of a nerd himself, and he liked all the good ones, all the fantastic references that one can expect, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Dante and all of the good thinkers and writers of his time and before him. So, Name of the Rose, beautiful mystery set in a monastery. It's historical fiction. And then there's another historical fiction, and this one, I have a physical copy of it, and it's in Italian because I was feeling like I needed to see the original, because this one is an epic poem. I'm talking about the liberation of Jerusalem, which is about the Crusades of, you guessed it, the liberation of Jerusalem. So it's an epic poem written in a beautiful Italian that is no longer in use. It's like an old Italian that I wanted to study and just love it. If you're interested in historical fiction or in classics, Italian classics, I recently made a video about it. I'm going to link it somewhere in the cards over here. Make sure to check it out. Tons of really big names that I love, and I don't want to mention them again because I don't want to mention the same books over and over again. But yeah, Elsa Morante, definitely check out History, which is set in Rome. Then there's Elena Ferrante, which is historical fiction recently acclaimed. Elena Ferrante won several awards, including New York Times Best Modern Classic of the 21st Century or something like that. I could be wrong about the titles. But anyway, the Neapolitans Quartet, I love, and I've talked about them before, so I don't want to be showing them all the time, but do check them out. And then there's always Natalia Ginsburg. She is great. But once again, I digress. Let's move on because we have another 9 prompts to go. So, prompt number 2 was inspired by Shakespeare, and this is Wherefore art thou, Verona? So, obviously a little nod to Romeo and Juliet, and I just wanted this one to be about a romantic plot. It can be either romance or, ill-fated lovers like Romeo and Juliet. So maybe literary fiction, but whatever you feel comfortable with. I chose to mention a short story that I read recently, and I haven't talked about it on the channel, so I felt that like this was the perfect opportunity. I actually listened to this one on audio, and I am talking about The Fortune Teller by Machado de Assis. So this is about a love triangle, and it starts in a very famous scene of one of our main characters talking to a fortune teller, asking her about her lover. So, great short story. And yeah, so prompt number 2, Wherefore art thou, Verona? And there's a second book that I want to mention for this prompt. And again, don't judge me because judging is so passé, okay? I recently read A Court of Thorn and Roses by the famous Sarah J. Maas, and I loved it. I thought it was really cool. So, if you want to check it out, if you're into romantasy, as they say, so a little bit of romance and fantasy, mostly romance. Depends who you ask. But yeah, I thought it was cool. As a modern read and a non-classic, sometimes it's nice to read those. I read everything. Now, for prompt number 3, which is in honor of Florence, I have Brushstrokes and Botticelli. Now, that is a prompt that talks about art and any of the arts in general. So we're talking about music, we're talking about painting, sculpting, blah, 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 any of the fine arts. So for this prompt, because I have recently talked about Françoise Gillot and her memoir that I've read in multiple of my videos, I thought I'll talk about a few different artists. Oh my goodness, excuse me. We're back. Okay, so these are actually musicians. I want to talk about Carole King because I read her memoir last year, and I haven't talked about it on the channel, but I really want to. She is a gifted storyteller. She shared a lot about her life and her family, her brother, his tragic story, and everything about her life and her career. And I had enjoyed this so much. I think I read this in a really short period of time. I can't remember now, but it was only a couple days, I think. Anyway, so let's read more about artists, any artists that you admire, and why not read about Carole King? You probably heard her song, You've Got a Friend. I think that's one of her most famous songs that she sings. So for prompt number 4, we were inspired by the beautiful Sicily, and we called it Myths of Mount Etna, which is a beautiful, picturesque part of the region. Now, when it comes to myths, I obviously want to mention the Aeneid, but I've talked about it before on the channel a number of times. And I've also talked about Lavinia, which is Ursula Le Guin's kind of fan fiction. Lavinia is the eventual wife of our hero from this famous epic, which tells the story of the foundation of Rome. And in the original Virgil poem, she doesn't really get a word in, but Lavinia does have a lot to say in this one, in this novel by Le Guin, and I loved it. So I don't want to be too obvious and talk about that one only. I also want to talk about another different type of mythology, and let's talk about some Celtic mythology. So have you heard of The Lost Years, which is a series about the Druid Merlin. This is a beautiful, I think I can show you without too much reflection the other books on the series. Okay, well, not so much. But yeah, so if you're into mythology, that's a really good one. I love mythology. I'm kind of fed up. I think I've had a little too much of mythological retellings and all that. But I did enjoy Circe. Circe by Madeline Miller, I believe. Yep. Moving on. So prompt number 5. Oh, also a book set in Italy that I talked about on my Italian classics video, The Leopard, is a historical fiction of a very important transitional period in Italian history, the Risorgimento. So definitely check out The Leopard if you're into historical fiction. Prompt number 5, the Bolognese Chronicles. Okay, so I have 2 very different recommendations for this prompt. This prompt is all about food because we can't talk about Italy without talking about. In my opinion, there are 2 things that we have to mention when we talk about Italy. One of them is beauty, because what is Italy without beauty, right? We're talking about la bella ragazza, il bel pranzo, la bella giornata, una bella famiglia, un bel giorno, una bella un bel casino. Cioè, tutto c'è bellezza. Everything, Italians are obsessed with beauty. And I think it shows, even more than Brazilians, I would say. But yeah, so we talked about art in prompt number 3. And I did mention musicians that aren't from Italy. But, you know, if you want to talk about Italian art, there are a lot of really big names, including all the big 5 for the fresco movement, the Italian fresco movement, like a Raffaello, in the Marble Faun. So the Marble Faun is about a group of American expats who are artists themselves in Rome, and it's just vibes, beautiful prose. Nathaniel Hawthorne, you probably know him from The Scarlet Letter, and yeah, so it's really interesting to see how foreigners write about themselves in different settings. So this is going to happen a second time during this video. The first one is about Americans. It's about an American writing about Americans in Italy. This time specifically in Rome. But later on, we're going to talk about a British writer writing about British people in Italy. But anyway, I digress. I'm doing that a lot. So let's focus on the prompts. So for the Bolognese Chronicles, which is about food, another topic that we think of when we think about food, when we think about Italy, there are 2 books I want to mention. One of them I'm going to link down below because it is public property. And this is just a fun little anecdote about myself because I have to practice what I preach. And I've been trying to learn Latin for years, like over 10 years. And I speak Italian, so I should be able to do it. And this book was written by a guy called Marcus Apictius. And he was just a guy who decided to write down some of his favorite recipes. And the book survived. And despite the vast historical knowledge that we have about what people in the Roman Empire ate, this is the actual only cookbook of the time that was kind of like just written by somebody back then. So this was really cool to read it. It's in Latin, and I'm going to link it down below if you're curious. Now, the second book I want to talk about for this prompt is Eat, Pray, and Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I read this when it came out, and I watched the movie with Julia Roberts, and I think that it's just it's a feel good, you know, it's a feel good nonfiction about a girl traveling, and you just can't go wrong with those. And fun fact, she ends up, in the book at least, she ends up with a Brazilian, which is just adorable. So, prompt number 6, from Sardinia with love. So now this, I thought I would do a little homage to all the spy books from John le Carré. And those are the obvious recommendations. If you want to take a look at them, I'll put some of them on the screen if you're not familiar with them. But what I want to talk about personally, what I want to recommend is a book called The Key to Rebecca. And this one is by Ken Follett. And Ken Follett is one of my probably formative writers that I binged on back then, back when I was a young girl, and I was discovering that this was going to be a lifelong passion for me. So yeah, this book is really special because it is actually tied to a different prompt that we're going to talk about later. But this one is about a German spy who uses Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is the book we're going to talk about later. And he uses it in an interesting way to write cryptic messages during World War II. So fantastic thriller, spy novel. Check it out. The Key to Rebecca. Another thriller that I wanted to talk about for the Sardinia prompt is Stalkers by Paul Flinch. So I read this when I was living in London. I think it was around 2017, and I still think about this book. So that's what I have to say about that. It's not a great novel, definitely not highbrow, not a classic. It falls under some cliches. Actually, you could say that some of its tropes end up being a little bit predictable, like the detective trope. But I have to say, the first part of this book, when the suspense is being built up, had me going. I did not sleep. I did not sleep the first time that I read this book, and then every time I caught the train or walked around or caught the tube, if you will, or went anywhere around the city, I was just always looking over my shoulder. So yeah, it did something to me. Definitely a thriller. Prompt number 7 is Prompt number 7 is in honor of Venice, and it's called In a Gondola with Casanova. So the obvious recommendation is Casanova. But In a Gondola with Casanova is supposed to be about forbidden romance. But, Casanova is also kind of fun and lighthearted. So for this one, I thought, why not A Room with a View by E.M. Foster? Remember how I talked about The Marble Fawn being about an American writing about Americans in Italy? This one is about an Englishman writing about English people in Italy, specifically in the Tuscan area. There is a movie about this, an adaptation from this novel. Fantastic. If I find the actress, I'll put her over here. I love her, but I can never remember her name. So, A Room with a View is just a fun little love triangle about British tourists spending time in Italy, and this girl with her family really wanted a room with a view. So, the rest is history, and yeah, fantastic lighthearted read. Lighthearted romance. Prompt number 8 is in combination with prompt number 6, like we talked about before. So, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Oh my goodness. So this book is just, it is like ASMR for the brain. It is like a massage, a deep massage that you never knew you needed. It is just, it's a romance, it's a gothic novel. It has got such a delicious, spooky vibe to it. And Rebecca is not you, our narrator. We follow an unnamed narrator throughout this novel. I read this in one sitting and I so recommend it. I might read you the first line. I might read you the opening line because it is so gorgeous. I just have to. Last night I dreamt I went to Matterley again. Oh my God. I want to read this again. I haven't read this in a few years and I just love it. So yeah, read this and then read the spy novel, The Key to Rebecca. Fantastic, fantastic experience. Very immersive. So prompt number 9, we were inspired by Torino. And this one, so this one is a common knowledge among Italians. And this is because Torino is known as La Magica. So Tales of Torino, La Magica. So this prompt is all about ghosts and supernatural and horror, kind of like to that end of town, that part of town. And I've been reading, I recently finished actually, Stephen King's Just After Sunset, which is a collection of short stories. And I have to say, Stephen King, you can talk about his novels. Sometimes his endings don't really quite hold, but in short format, his short stories, he always delivers. And I hadn't read this collection before. I know he just released a new collection. I'll try to put it somewhere on the screen. But yeah, before I read that one, I wanted to read this one because I had a physical copy of it and I just hadn't finished it. But yeah, it absolutely delivered. Just After Sunset, collection of short stories. If you're into those sort of more Stephen King stories. So prompt number 10 is the last prompt, and it's called Musing in Milan. So from Musing in Milan, and this is the rise of the Roman Empire. Now Polybius argues that you're not really entitled. Maybe you are entitled, but people shouldn't listen to you if you write a history book and you didn't actually experience some part of the history that you're writing about. So if you weren't a soldier there, or if you weren't from that country or didn't live it, which is an interesting thing to argue. And yeah, so that's just the beginning of Polybius. He is a very interesting character who was a Greek statesman who was taken prisoner into Rome, but he had some really good friends and he ended up having a pretty okay life, to be honest. I once again want to talk about Ovid just briefly because is it set in Italy? Is it amusing? Is it a bit out there? You could say so. You could say so. So the Metamorphosis, not the Metamorphosis, that would be Kafka. Metamorphosis by Ovid and Amores by Ovid. Really, anything by Ovid is something that I would recommend if you're interested in ancient literature. But I think that is it for our tag. Okay, Daniela, I hope you are happy with what we've done. Thank you so much for staying until the end. And if you haven't yet, please don't forget to like and subscribe so other people who have the same taste as you can come across this video. Now, make sure to check out Daniela's video at The Uncommon Reader. We're dropping our videos at the same time. Hopefully, I am done editing. before it's time. But thank you so much. And if you haven't yet, check out our community tab. I'm always sharing new accounts that I find of people joining BookTube, but also I like to share quizzes and all sorts of extra stuff. So once again, thank you so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.